something that is untrue. The goal is to undermine the idea that the truth can be known. And I think that is something that is, so that this is undermining trust, basically. Undermining trust in the scientific process, for example, is something that we've been witnessing for decades when it comes to climate change, for example. I mean, there's this majorly important, if somewhat hard to read book, Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes, that sort of shows how, especially the oil and gas industry in the US, they pay people to undermine trust into the science of climate change. That is a major strategic way of getting what you want. In this case, continuing with a business model that destroys the planet, basically. If you look at propaganda in Europe right now that is trying to undermine trust in media institutions and governments, it's always the attempt to not say believe this, but it's the attempt to say don't believe that, and don't believe those people, and don't believe in the methods that they use. Everybody can have their own opinions. Like a concrete example, if I have the time. When MH17, a Malaysian airline plane, was shot down over Ukraine years ago. And we all know that there's conclusive evidence that there was a Russian missile that shot down the plane. And of course, Russia knew it right away, because it was their missile. What RT, Russia Today, the Kremlin propaganda TV channels, did then wasn't to say, no, that didn't happen. They said it was a Ukrainian missile. It was a NATO plane. There was a bomb on board. There was a technical malfunction on board. They put out all these conflicting theories about what happened at the same time to undermine the idea that it could ever come out what really happened, because they are obviously. So undermining trust is the core principle, I would say, of most people who try to, and that ties in with the first question basically, who try to establish the truth and to try to get truth or facts across to people. So truth and trust, or facts and trust, are intertwined inextricably.
And in a strange way, there's an array of alternative facts to erode trust and to sort of question truth itself. So the attack on truth is an attack on the trust behind the truth. And it often happens in more organized ways, which we'll definitely get back to.
Precisely.
Shehan, I want to get to you and say what happens to individuals who are consuming all of this. We are building our own truths for ourselves with empirical truths that we see around us. We're understanding and navigating our socio-political landscapes. We're understanding and navigating global events like the pandemic. We're also understanding and navigating our role within these sort of landscapes, right? You've written Seven Moons of Mali Almeida. You have a character who has incredibly strong conviction on matters that are incredibly complex. And he's arriving at certain truths where you know that he might not necessarily have the right interpretation of the events that unfolded. And quite honestly, he doesn't know what's happened to him for a large part as well. What happens to individual testimony, to one's own truth, I know you don't like the term, in such an information landscape?
Well, firstly, let me I have to part company with most of you here because I tell lies for a living. So let's move to the liars, which there are a lot of us among us here. But also, okay, I work teacher over here, but occasionally I relapse, and advertising is about massaging various lies so that they are plausible enough for you to pull out your wallet. And writing fiction it's a weird counterpoint to that, because you're telling a lie. Yes, you're the ghost, I haven't met demons, but here's this guy, and you're telling these lies. My first book was about how Sri Lanka won a World Cup. Science fiction these days. was true. I don't know if anyone will believe it. But I wonder now, this example that you brought up of the Times, of the front page of the Times. I remember when I was growing up, the evening news, my dad would make sure everyone was silent to watch the evening news because that's where the truth was. I wonder if this is another lie that we wrapped ourselves up in, this idea of this singular narrative. Because, and also I also wonder if it's just the domain of us writers and artists. And I'm glad to have a Nobel laureate in chemistry, because I'm not sure if the sciences or commerce or business is immune to this. Because let me give you one personal example. I turned 50 this year. I know I look a lot older, but I was born in 1975. And I've had this morning question of cholesterol and statins. And again, multiple truths there. My mom and my mother-in-law send me WhatsApp saying statins are evil, they'll give you cancer and AIDS and dementia, stay away from it. My doctors say it's a wonder drug, it's going to protect your kidneys, your heart and everything. In between that...
Which of those is actually trained?
My mom knows a lot, but okay. In the end, and also within America, some doctors say, no, get free of all these substances, some say it's keeping you alive. In the end, I have to literally put my heart on the line and figure out which truth that I accept.
And what did you do?
I'm still deciding, I'm still popping in. November 10th, I was told to take a 6-week holiday. Let's see, I'll update you before Christmas. But yeah, so now, this is one example of science, chemistry being infallible.
I have to say, I had the same dilemma and I opted for statins.
And your testimony will be
Your
testimony.
You guys can do it. But now another unfortunate side effect of winning a Booker Prize that I've had to deal with accountants and lawyers. Again, lawyers, okay, let's put them aside, we know about their relationship with the truth, but accountants, you think that is, but these dudes are more creative than, especially when it comes to taxes, inventing these numbers to say something else. And Sri Lanka had an economic crisis recently, and I started going through, what does that mean? It's so abstract. Okay, we defaulted on a loan and now we're on a grand scale that we buy. So I wonder, you talk about testimony. Mali Almeida was convinced of a truth that he had taken photographs. The reason that the Sri Lankan war had carried on is that no one knew about it. And if his photographs were seen, the war would end. People would know the horrors and that would end. But I wonder, and without giving away how that turns out, he said, I want to take a photograph of the Sri Lankan war like the Napalm Girl of Vietnam. Now the Napalm Girl, we all know that image. It won a Pulitzer Prize in 1971 or 1969 I think, after the My Lai massacre. But the fact is that did not stop that war. It carried on for another 6-7 years. And when Mali Almeida came out, it's set in '89, where perhaps that generation more idealistic and had more belief in the truth. We had the Aragalaya, which there were cameras everywhere. If someone wrote a novel about Aragalaya, like what I found writing about the 80s, there weren't many photographs, but now there are photographs. Now we have documented evidence of slaughter, of massacres, of genocide, but is it stopping the war? Because everyone has their own narrative on that. And so I wonder, it's good for novels to show characters who have conviction, but I think also what I do in the editing process is I start taking out my convictions. I think my job is, if you do it well, is to present the various narratives. Because in Sri Lankan history there are so many. There's so many narratives about the 1996 World Cup, about Murali. Is he the greatest bowler of all time or is he a chucker? There's, again, heated arguments. Was he a good ambassador for the Tamil people or was he a traitor? So I've been unraveling this. The first line of Chinaman is, if a liar tells you he is lying, is he telling the truth? And so I think I have to say, let's embrace the lie. I don't have any solutions
Let's
for you.
embrace the lie.
I'm
not going to be very happy about that.
I have no solutions for you, but I think all we can do is present the narratives as best we can.
But I want to stay with that emotion, right? I want to stay with that emotion, going back to your opinions on statins. And I want to turn to you, Venki. What happens when people don't want the truth? What happens? You were the head of the Royal Society when the pandemic broke out.
Well, I think, it's human nature to pay more importance to trusted relationships and so on. And it's very, the scientific method of relying on sort of objective evidence when it doesn't have anything to do personally with you it's a problem. It's human nature is very susceptible to emotional, what I call emotional, pulls, rather than this sort of dispassionate view of things. The thing about statins is, statins are complicated, but there's a very clear mechanism by how they work. But they do have side effects in a small number of people, and so I think the medical community needs to simply be honest about that and say, look, and by and large they are, and say, look, the odds are it will help you. There's a very small chance that you may be one of the people that will experience a bad side effect, in which case you can stop it. Okay, and so that's how it moves.
But you say this as someone who believes in the scientific method, but you've also been in situations where you've had to communicate this to the public. And the pandemic is a great example.
Yeah.
With the vaccine, we had to say it's 100% safe, otherwise nobody would take it. And somewhere,
yeah, so
you have to make that,
for example, the equivalent of climate change in pandemic was masks. Do masks work or not? And in the US, for example, it became extremely polarized, so that, it became a political view rather than a scientific view. So if you were right-wing, you felt that masks were a bad thing. It became a tribal thing rather than a scientific thing. So if you're a member of one tribe, you said, I'm not going to wear masks anywhere. And if you're of the other tribe, you would say, I'm going to wear masks even when I'm walking around in the park. Okay, when masks have there's no need to wear them. And so you had these extreme polarization of masks. And so, one of the things that I advocated was masks. And even among scientists, there was an argument, because they say, there are no randomized controlled trials showing that masks work. Well, there are cases where you can't do randomized trials. For example, surgeons wear masks when operating. But there has never been an experiment where they took 100 surgeons to operate without masks and 100 surgeons with masks and asked how many patients died. Or, the famous thing is, there are no randomized controlled trials for parachutes. So, that's what I call a kind of, methods a dogmatism about methods. The reason to suspect masks work is, physically they'll prevent droplets from penetrating. There are other ways in which you can believe that masks have a good chance to work. And but they'll only work in a pandemic if everybody wears them. And so if you have even 20 or 30% who are not going to wear them, then the effect will very rapidly disappear, and then it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy that masks don't work. Okay, they don't work because you don't think they'll work, and you're not going to wear them. So you get that sort of competition, and that really played out in the pandemic quite a lot.
And often this tribalism, Christian, is not a flaw, it is by design. The information ecosystems we've created around ourselves encourage this kind of disinformation to spread more easily. So can you tell us a little more about what is it that makes this sort of anti-vaxxer sentiment or an anti-mask sentiment or a sort of very deeply held belief that goes against the science so alluring?
Well, in terms of identity is an important term that Venki just used. If you manage to create a situation where people say, it's part of my tribal identity to believe this, or not believe this, or not believe these people, that's very important as well, then you have a good chance of keeping people voting for you, basically. As soon as you turn someone tribal, it's extremely difficult to get them away again from that kind of attitude. The most extreme examples are conspiracy theorists, right? Because that goes back to what we talked about before. A conspiracy theorist, when you present them with evidence, even if it's a photo, and I encourage you to read this book, by the way, this is one of these people. And the evidence plays a major role in this tale of lies, basically, obviously. So evidence is a crucial thing. But a conspiracy theorist will, no matter what kind of evidence you will present, he or she will say, yeah, well, that's your evidence. You know, I don't believe your data. One of the most toxic quotes I think in the scientific arena is from, I'm not sure I'm back translating this correctly, I think it's by Winston Churchill, never believe a statistic you haven't faked yourself. that is something that conspiracy theorists love to quote. You know, it's like, yeah, these are your facts, but I have my own facts. So that's one thing. The other thing is right now we all, how many of you, raise your hands, how many of you have received information from the internet today? Algorithmically sorted platform, search engine, social media, whatever. So this is, well, 70%. So all of you have moved today in an information ecosystem that is designed to not provide you with the best, most factually correct information, whatever. It's designed to harvest your attention. All social media platforms is harvesting attention, packaging it, and selling it. And the core design principle to achieve that is optimizing for engagement. It's not optimizing for truth or relevance or whatever. So the front page of the Times, however flawed it might always have been, is optimized by something that we in communications research you would call news factors. So how important is it, how many people are affected by it, and so on. The optimization principle of, say, Facebook or Meta or TikTok or X or whatever, is how many people will interact with this specific piece of content. The more people are likely to interact with it, and that means like it, share it, comment on it, not necessarily click on it. Most of those don't want you to click on it. They want you to stay here and go away. The thing is, we know from research, and it's well established across various platforms, stuff that engages people, that creates engagement, is stuff that usually is emotionalizing people, and negative emotions work best. So we've created an ecosystem that actively encourages outrage. And everybody here has experienced that, right? How many of you are after looking at your phone? Yeah, because you're moving in outrage-optimized environments. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how many of you have picked up your phone and 10 minutes later found out that you are doing something with it that you didn't plan to do? There's lots of intelligent, well-educated people. Why is that? Same to me, by the way, of course. Because the user interface, and that's a psychology thing, psychology training, and of these platforms are designed for frictionless interaction. There's a famous book called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, by a guy who's a psychologist, I'm ashamed to say. And my favorite line from the book is, doing must be easier than thinking. That is what you all do when you pick up your phones, right? There's no correlation between the number of times people use their phones and the reported number of times they use their phones. You don't know how often you use your phone because you use it on autopilot most of the time. The problem is, this is, Daniel Kahneman would say, system one cognition. You're in an automatic, autopilot, associative mode of cognition, and that's where all of our cognitive distortions reside. Like the truth illusion. If you hear something a lot of the time, you will eventually believe it. That is a process, an automatic process that you don't control. So you're using your phone in a cognition mode that is receptive to any cognitive distortion there is, and it's optimized for outrage. And that all makes these ecosystems ideal breeding grounds for disinformation, because disinformation doesn't have to stick to pesky stuff like relevance, facts, whatever. It can be outrage and engagement optimized to the absolute limit. And that's what's happening.
Can I just add to these 2 points? Because I think it's all very well me saying there's multiple truths and novelists present it to the reader and the reader brings their truth to it. But I think it becomes a huge problem when you need consensus in areas like a pandemic or climate change. And now I have a yoga teacher who's a very nice guy, but is also a fascist, which is apparently not. Is that compatible? That's a thing apparently. There's a book called Fascist Yoga, and he was anti-vaxxer, anti-masks, keep it natural, and all of that. And to this day, his truth is that, well, I'm not dead. And look at that guy who took the vaccine and got a heart attack at 49. Therefore, how dare you come to me with your science and all your facts, because my truth is what I live and breathe. And I think all joking aside, we do need truths that we hold universal. And again, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, written by a bunch of slave owners, right? And yet, so we are able to kind of hold these contradictions there. And I arrived at this also. 7 Moons came out at the end of the Sri Lankan War. We all agreed that the war ending was a good thing, 30-year war, but how did it end? And again, multiple narratives. How many civilians were killed? Were they terrorists? Was it our fault? Was it their fault? We're hearing these arguments now. And I put forward the idea, I think in one of the books, I probably got taken out of the draft, but the idea that can we all agree that killing children is wrong? Killing children is a war crime, killing anyone who does that is morally wrong. And you'd think that is something everyone can get behind, regardless of your persuasion, but try that argument. And you would go, yeah, okay, you hippie, all good, but, in some certain instances, it's necessary, no one likes to do it. And so I think that's the problem with this idea of keeping nebulous, which I believe it is. How do you, so I guess I'm asking the question, how do you have these universal truths that we can all buy into?
And I want to prod a
unless we become fascists.
I want to prod a bit further on your point. We're not all becoming fascists, right? But I want to prod a bit further, Shehan, and sort of build upon what Christian said, right? That there is a way in which social media or your phone or information ecosystems today are optimized for outrage and are built upon this kind of rejecting the truth with a certain sort of purpose, which is to keep you hooked onto those ecosystems. What then is the purpose of literature today? Because your reason behind exposing a multiplicity of truths or narratives is perhaps not, and I hope not, the same as Meta's reason behind keeping somebody hooked to their phone, right? So where does this question of purpose come in? And at a time when we are hooked to our phones, when we're sitting in a non-algorithmic literature festival, what is the purpose of literature in sort of reshaping some of those boundaries and sort of recreating the idea that there can be multiple narratives, but the purpose of those multiple narratives is not to fuel outrage or to sort of fuel alternative truth or to question truth itself?
Look, as addictive as Meta and all of that. So I was studying those techniques. You want your books to be page turners, you want them, so I'm not higher than any of them. My motives are the same. They make a lot more money than me, but same techniques. And provoking outrage, sometimes that is our purpose as well. Sometimes if there has been injustice that you're writing about. But I don't have an answer for that, because when I'm editing, I'm always trying not to write the propaganda. Because I think if you can see my belief on religion, you could probably infer it from the books what I feel about religion, but then I think I failed. My idea is that, and that's why you create characters who are different, who have different values. And Mali Almeida was convinced of truths, was convinced that going out and taking these photographs was a worthy cause, and gave his life for that cause. No spoiler there, he's dead in the first chapter. But I've often thought, okay, because with Sri Lanka's history there are multiple narratives, multiple debates that continue going. So, yeah, I don't know whether, okay, you provoke the outrage, you show the alternative views, but beyond that, I think if the novelist steps in and ventures opinion, then you're writing an opinion piece, you're writing non-fiction, and I feel that's a different side of the street that I don't work on. So I don't know the role of literature, but I do know that you don't put down a book. You pick up a book, you don't put down a book. I've seen my kids when I take the device off them and how feral they get. You put down a book with a feeling of peace and a feeling of thoughtfulness, I believe. Not the same emotion when you put down your phone. So maybe that's something worth promoting, even if it doesn't offer answers. It does offer you that ability to reflect and the ability to see the different viewpoints, and maybe even, let's say even, adjust your viewpoint slightly. I'm not saying change your mind, but adjust it slightly.
Do you want to comment on that, Venki?
Yeah, so I think there's a difference between social media. We were talking about what's the difference between social media and writing a novel. I think with a novel, there is an intent on the part of the author to portray something, to portray a point of view or multiple points of view. I think with social media, the content is it's neutral with regard to content. It's irrelevant. The purpose is to, as Christophe pointed out, is to gather attention, to gather information about the customer or the user and so on. And the reason that it's dangerous is that, what is true is a very, very small subset of the entire universe. So there are far more lies, there are far more multiplicity of lies and different kinds of lies than there are actual facts. And so if you're neutral with respect to content, then lies are going to win out, because there are many more of them and many more directions. And so I think just even if you were completely neutral, you would find social media as a vehicle for disinformation and misinformation.
And you're a scientist, and one of the things that scientists get locked together with writers is their tendency to live in ivory towers, right? And that science is also an almost pure pursuit, almost like writing is. When you're seeing this play out in front of you, when you see disinformation spread at such a massive scale, when you know that lies win over truth, what keeps your faith in truth alive? You're so passionate about the truth.
Yeah, I think, scientists, not all scientists, some scientists are not very good at communicating, and they're best off just working in the lab or in the office. But those who can really need to communicate as a counterweight, but in doing so, they have to really always make clear, how do we know this? Not, I'm the, belong to the scientific priesthood, and then therefore, statins are okay to take. That's not the way to do it. You have to figure out how to communicate how things work. How did we learn, or with climate change, how do we know climate change is happening? What are the uncertainties? And also to communicate to the public that we live in a world of uncertainty, and we always have to make a decision. Life is uncertain, and we're constantly making decisions. And so we always have to make a decision based on the best evidence we have at the time, and that's a perfectly reasonable way to proceed. And, people argue about evidence. I just want to point out one thing. 50 years ago, photography was evidence. We talked about the Vietnam War and, the napalm photograph and so on. Today, a napalm photograph would not be considered evidence because photography can be faked very easily. So there we've gone from something that was rock solid evidence to something that's no longer evidence. So we have to constantly also ask, what is evidence? And we have to have scientists have a consensus in their field about what is considered evidence and what isn't.
And absolutely, forensics has evolved over time.
Exactly.
So to sort of consider what is evidence and not, but you scratched at the surface of something that we were definitely going to get to at some point in this conversation, which is around the possibility of manipulation that has been greater than ever before, right? And I want to turn to you, Christian, and talk about AI, right? We simply cannot know what is real or artificially generated anymore. How many of you have watched videos on your phone that ask you, is this real or AI? And many of you will scroll through and I can't tell if a flood happening somewhere in a remote corner of the world is real or has been completely artificially generated to provoke outrage in me, right? It is so realistic today that I can't tell the difference between what is real and AI, even in the video, let alone in what somebody has written. For scientists to communicate more effectively and to be better communicators, what real hope do we have when we are confronted with a volume of information production that is not humanly possible to counter?
Yeah. Well, let me first say something else, if I may. Because this has been spinning around my head now. I talked to a crime writer from Norway earlier, I don't know, from Ellen, and it struck me that we are very bad as scientists. We are pretty bad at making our process interesting, right? It's most people, as soon as you start talking about methodology, people tend to tune out, right? But
That's why they don't pay us as much as football.
maybe. No, but the thing is, that's what struck me. I mean, I think the most successful form of literature there is about something that is pretty similar to the scientific process, right? I mean, the crime novel, they're evaluating evidence, they're trying to establish facts, there's forensics, there's science. I mean, there's whole TV series about people who are specialists in blood spatters, so people are actively engaged in following people through this quasi-scientific process, but we somehow haven't got around to that. Maybe someone will write science fiction that is actually closer to the original meaning of the term at some point. The other thing, AI, I'm sorry about this interlude. So, in a way, I think, a colleague of mine in Germany once said, it was possible to lie with pictures before AI, obviously. A picture, even though I agree with you in principle, of course there's been visual propaganda before the age of AI. And actually, if you look at a lot of the samples that we see in our studies, a lot of the disinformation you see online still is not necessarily AI faked. It's just taken out of context. You see people running down the street, but it's not really in Egypt, it's in Spain 5 years ago. Or you see pictures of bombs hitting a building, but it's really footage from a computer game. Stuff like that, what we call shadow fakes. People take information, put it in a different context, spin a different narrative, and that is working very well. So you don't need AI to make disinformation. And it's been going on for a long time. We have these perfect disinformation delivery ecosystems now, which is one thing. They had been flooded with content before AI, right? That's why we have these algorithmic sorting systems. I know that the last number I know on this is from 2005. Guess in your head a second, how many minutes of material are uploaded to YouTube globally in 1 minute? Every minute of the day, 24 hours a day. The correct answer is 500 hours. 500 hours of material are uploaded to YouTube. This is something from 2020, which is the last time they reported it, so it's probably more now or whatever. So, of course, the massive content has been way, way, way too large for quite some time. Now, what AI does is it lowers the marginal cost of creating high-quality looks disinformation. So it's more, I would argue, it's more a quantitative than a qualitative change. All of these problems were there before. Now, just the people who want to lie to you, it's becoming cheaper for them. That's what AI does. And that exacerbates the problem, but I'd still, and of course, Meta, Facebook, Insta, even search engines, all of these are AI, right? We've been using AI daily, all of us, for decades. We just don't call it, it's still machine learning. All of these delivery systems, I think, and their core optimization goals, the way that we shape our public sphere based on how much money can be squeezed out of it, that is the core problem, and AI is just adding drops to the toxic mix.
Universities have discovered that it's very cheap to lie to you and you don't need expensive or AI for quality or quantity. I would say but I was going to say exactly to you, Shehan.
No, so I'm just expanding on this. I realize if you go before photography, the written word, you'd have a correspondent going to the Crimean War, the Boer War, and filing handwritten. And again, I'm sure that was like the Times of India front page. That was the truth from the front lines. But again, I'm sure that person could have been a fiction writer or could have been peddling some agenda. So this is not a new idea. Photographs being taken out of context. And and all of that. But I'd like to think that perhaps the lie gets found out eventually. Maybe it takes a century, hopefully not that long, but the lie eventually gets found
But
out.
I want to push against that, right? Because we had a brief conversation about what does it do to conviction when all of these systems we held as sacred come crumbling, right? Mali Almeida believes that his photographs will make a difference. What if he knows that they won't make a difference? Maybe he believes that a video will make a difference. What if he knows the video doesn't make a difference, right? What happens to any of us when we lose conviction that anything we do matters because we're so overwhelmed by everything that's happening around us? What does a character like that look like? What do we look like?
So, Mali Almeida, it was interesting for me to write because he was born in the 50s, living in the 80s, so that boomer generation, that post-independence generation who believed they could change the world. I came a generation later, we had no conviction. Kurt Cobain killed himself when we were 19, and from then on there was no hope, there was no truth, we were nihilistic, and you look at that generation, there were not many activists in the 90s among our generation because we thought this war will go on forever and nothing will change. But thankfully, the kids are a bit more idealistic, have more conviction, and because if you look at, fast forward to 2022, the Aragal, that great movement that toppled the government, that was held not by, I was sitting and watching TV with my friends, cracking beer, going, look at these crazy kids, what are they doing? But the kids were out there in the front lines believing that, let's get rid of all these old men and women, I've said, small minority, this generation that's destroyed, these two parties that have destroyed the country. And so, hopefully they don't reach my age and lose that conviction, and I think the challenges are rife because of all these techniques and multiple truths and the fact that AI gets more and more insidious. But so I would say, yeah, our generation was famous for our lack of conviction, but maybe, and we always push again. Also, I think humans are contrarian by nature, so even if you present a universal truth, there'll be someone out there trying to disprove it just to make a name for themselves or just to be contrarian. And I think
but I think that's actually what often drives science forward, is to, if you disprove the consensus, you become much more famous than if you simply add to the consensus. So I think that's not a bad thing, actually.
No, I don't think so. And if something cannot be disproved, then perhaps we've stumbled on something that's true. So there is hope, I believe.
So science is outrage optimized as well, in a way.
So science is outrage optimized as well.
So smatting the paradigm is the way to the Nobel.
So in an outrage optimized world where the truth seems further away than it ever has, what we can rest easy knowing is that conviction does still exist and that hope still does exist. And even the naysayers who might be fighting against the truth might one day end up supporting the truth rather than undermining it. And on that note, I want to thank all three of you. Before we move on to questions, can we have a loud round of applause for all three of them? We have 7 minutes for questions. So I'm going to start taking questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. And I will get a mic to the gentleman with the cap there. Can you get a mic to him, please? If you could keep your questions brief, please, I would be very, very grateful.
To recall, flashback to Nazi Germany, Joseph Goebbels, if you repeat a lie often enough, it will soon be accepted as the truth. Any panelists would like to comment?
Well, I told you that